Welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges. Insights from SoCal's trusted attorneys.
Welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges, Insights from SoCal's trusted attorneys with Sarah Kostrabati. With a focus on family law, consumer protection, and employment law, Sarah offers helpful, caring, and professional legal services and advice. I'm your host, John Clements, and today's episode is Surviving Debt Collector Harassment During and After Your Divorce. So first of all, Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into the questions. There's a lot I'm going to go over, and I want to know, first of all, what happens to joint debt as well as individual debt when a couple in California divorces?
Yeah, absolutely. So in California, debt's technically going to be seen as community property, especially if it was acquired during the marriage. So both parties would be responsible for that debt. Sometimes people get really confused because they think, well, it's my spouse's name on the credit card or it's my spouse's information that was given to the bank. But if that debt was acquired during the marriage, doesn't matter if it's in one person's name or the other, it's going to be both parties' responsibility.
Okay, so in that case, doesn't matter whose name is on the bill, whose name is on the card, it all goes into the pile and all has to be dealt with as if both parties owned it?
Correct. Yeah. So typically, what ends up happening is you've got your assets, right, and you've got your debts. And what the court will look at, or the parties will look at, is how much do we have in assets? How much do we have in debts? Do the assets maybe pay off those debts? Can they pay off those debts using the assets? But typically, what ends up happening is both parties are responsible. I get a lot of calls that say, "Well, my name's not on any of these credit cards, so am I responsible for them?" And if it was acquired during the marriage and not for nefarious reasons, then yeah, it's going to be you're going to be responsible for paying that as
Oh,
well.
yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure that's something, I mean, you get a lot of calls. That's something that not a lot of people are going to know. So it's great to kind of get that on the open in a format like this.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, anytime you're talking about a divorce, there's assets, there's debts, and that all has to be, you know, looked at and figured out. How about debt collection? That might throw a curve in things. So how does debt collection impact, a divorce during the financial settlement process?
Yeah, absolutely. So it can cause problems. I mean, as you can imagine, debt collection in and of itself is pretty scary. But then when you're also dealing with the aspect of divorce, parties maybe sometimes don't know, am I responsible for it? Do I have to pay this? Do I not have to pay it? So worrying about the debt collection, in addition to the divorce, can definitely be daunting. But some important things that clients do take or they think about is, am I going to even get reimbursed if I pay this? Should I maybe not pay it? Should I make them pay it? At the end of the day, though, it is, like I mentioned before, the community is responsible for it. So it's community debt. When you're paying for it, let's say they're calling you and harassing you about the debt, you can pay it and then ask for a reimbursement from the community, meaning you're going to get some kind of a reimbursement or you've got your positive and your negative sign with divorce as far as assets are concerned, and that negative that you just paid off you may get paid for on that positive side.
I see. So it's all going to still go into the arithmetic, I guess, even if you do
Mhm.
pay it. Yeah, and that's just yeah.
You want to make sure that you're keeping track of it. You want to make sure that you have, written confirmation of what you've paid, who you've paid it to. But it is important that you don't let that go to, a point where there's no return, either a lawsuit or it being on your credit reports. There's no reason why the finances have to really hurt you during a divorce. I would always explain that to your attorneys too and say, hey, I've got this debt collector calling me, or I've got this credit card that's, I didn't know about. Explain that to your attorney. They'll definitely be able to give you like a step by step on what needs to happen, but you most likely are going to want to pay that so it doesn't harm you even more.
That's a good point. So you mentioned some various types of debt. There's, whether it's a medical bill at a collections agency or a credit card. So what are some of the common types of debt that might be contested during a divorce?
Yeah, good question. So any debt could really get contested, but typically what we see is credit card debt. One of the spouses either, didn't know about that credit card, didn't use that credit card. There's that misunderstanding that just because they didn't use that credit card, it's not their debt. Also, there could be an issue where one person is just, more frugal than the other, doesn't use credit cards, and one maybe shops. That could be something that's hotly contested. And then also, if there are credit card charges that were used for maybe extra marital affairs like hotels charges, things like that. I mean, we've seen even Victoria's Secret charges on these credit cards, and those get hotly contested. And if you can prove that those weren't for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of the partnership, then oftentimes you can actually make it so that you don't have to pay those debts.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, other things that end up happening, there's a ton. Other things that happen, back taxes, for instance. So if you were expecting not to pay taxes, or if the taxes were done incorrectly, sometimes those taxes also are hotly contested. The party that did pay their taxes on time or whatever, could say that that's not my problem, it's not my issue. Also, we've recently had quite a few clients who haven't done their taxes in quite a few years. So sometimes that gets really sticky, and parties get upset when they're finding out for the first time during a divorce that maybe they haven't done taxes since 2020, and now they owe all these back taxes as well. And then there's a couple more I want to go over. Personal loans as well. So sometimes we have clients who say, well, I borrowed money from my mom or my dad to pay off the car or to pay off a home, or like instances like that. That definitely gets contested too, because it's, those are usually not in writing. They're not, there's no contract you can really point to. There's no terms as far as interest rates, things like that, that normal contracts have. And then oftentimes parties will sometimes just say that to say that they owe their parents money, but maybe it was a gift and not a loan. So that is hotly contested. And then the last one is student loans. A lot of people have this misconception that they're going to have to pay off somebody else's student loans. Usually, student loans are actually separate property. So the party that went to school oftentimes wants the other party to pay their student loans, and that um, doesn't always happen.
Oh, so that's interesting. So that seems like that's a bit of a separate legal category, student loans especially, than maybe some other things. So that's a good tip. So we're talking about paying off debt and avoiding creditors, or at least trying to deal with creditors during a divorce. And let's say that I'm the spouse in this case, and I'm not responsible for certain debts, and I'm getting harassed by a debt collection agency. How do I approach that?
So when it's the debt collection agency, usually what ends up happening as a legal standpoint is the debt collection agency is going to be contacting the party that has the actual credit card in their name or the loan in their name. Sometimes they will reach out to family members like a spouse or a parent. And in that case, you may just want to say to them, look, I'm not so and so. You can contact them at this number, or maybe not even give them the number and just say
Mm.
it's just they're not here anymore. We're in the process of getting divorced. You don't have to say much. You can also say they're just not here. But I would definitely bring that up to your attorney, because if a debt collector is contacting you and your name is not on that card, and you either didn't know about it or haven't been handling the finances, that means the other person isn't handling paying those cards. So it is going to affect a lot of things. It may not affect your credit report, but it's going to affect how that divorce asset and debt distribution happens.
So it sounds to me that when you're going through a divorce, being upfront and open and having clear communication with your attorney is just, you're just never going to lose if you do that.
Absolutely. We're here to mitigate the damages, right? And to kind of give you guidance and help figure out what needs to happen. So, the more information you give us, the clearer picture we have, the better for us to be able to say, okay, this is how we would handle that, or this is how we should handle that. Or taking it back to, the other side and saying, this isn't our client's problem. It's kind of your problem. We've got to figure out how to deal with this. But yeah, it's very important that you're clear and honest with your attorney as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about dealing with these debts and communicating with the creditors during divorce proceedings. And I'm curious to know, are there ways to negotiate with creditors while you're going through this to avoid either future harassment or additional financial penalties?
Yeah, absolutely. So our firm is kind of unique in that we have our family law side, and then we also have a consumer protection side too. So we actually help negotiate debts for families who are dealing with just this issue. But If you're looking to do it yourself or you're looking kind of to figure out how to do it, you definitely can negotiate. That's one of the things that creditor, they want to get paid. They don't care how they get paid, who pays them, or when they get paid. Well, they do care about when they get paid, but they don't care about how and who. So you can negotiate with them. You can definitely make sure that you are reaching out to an attorney if you need to negotiate for you on your behalf. Again, you can always discuss that with your attorney. Like your family law attorney should be able to have that conversation with you, determine what the next step is. I wouldn't just negotiate the debt without speaking to your attorney, because you never know if that debt is part of the community. The reason why I say that is a lot of people, once you get separated, any debt that you acquire after the separation could be seen as your separate property. So you may be paying that thinking you're going to get a reimbursement, but in reality, that's your separate property. So you're responsible for that 100%. So it's always important to have that discussion with your attorney, come up with a game plan on what you're going to do with that debt.
Nice. And I think just to clarify something you just said, and kind of mix it in with something you said earlier, any kind of debt that you would have accrued before your marriage and after the separation would not be a community debt.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard. It's sometimes hard to figure out what that is, right? If you came into a marriage with credit card debt, then yes, you absolutely could say, well, the marriage paid that credit card debt off, and it was supposed to be his separate debt or her separate debt. Same thing with after fact. If you are using the credit cards and you're thinking, well, I'm just going to keep using these credit cards because it's my name on it, and you keep using community funds to pay off that credit card debt, you may also have to do a reimbursement in that case.
Okay, so that's super interesting. Yeah, there's a lot. So there's a lot more to it, I think, than maybe might be apparent on first glance. So I'm glad people like you are around that we can call and say, "Hey, Sarah, I need help with this."
Thank you.
Something we mentioned briefly that I want to go back and touch on a little bit deeper is we mentioned for example, this idea of one side of the one of the partners has maybe an extramarital affair going on, and they've been making some purchases that they probably don't want the other person to know about. And then that comes up, right? So now you got hidden assets, hidden income, and how does that work in a divorce settlement?
So it's really important during the divorce process that you are clear and honest about the debts that you have and the assets that you have. So if one, I think what you're alluding to is like if someone's hiding assets or using assets that should be community but for their own purposes, there are definitely discovery. You could do discovery, which is a way for you to get information. So you can get those credit card bills, you can get those bank statements and prove that those charges were not for the purpose or for the benefit of the community. The other thing is the courts will penalize people who are lying. The whole point of family law court is it's supposed to be a court of equity. So what's fair and just and equitable for both parties. So if the court finds out, or if you can show that your partner is hiding assets, then the court sometimes will actually award you penalties for that too, or we call them sanctions, because they're lying. There's also in a relationship or in a marriage, really, there's something called a fiduciary duty, meaning you owe your spouse a duty to make sure that the finances are being used properly. So when you're using it for things like extramarital affairs or you're hiding those assets, that can definitely be shown that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing as far as that duty is concerned, and you could be breaching that fiduciary duty. And again, that's something else that the court takes very seriously and can sanction for. Everything else, I mean, anything can really be considered bad faith. So if you are trying to hide assets, or sometimes what we get is they're not necessarily hiding assets, but they've got a profit and loss statement that maybe isn't the most accurate or truthful, or maybe they're taking payments in cash versus in credit card or check, things like that. If you can prove that that's bad faith, then the court will definitely sanction on that too. They'll take that into consideration.
It seems to me that, like in many areas of life, honesty is the best policy. Just be honest, be upfront.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the divorce process it's a lengthy one sometimes, and it's very hard for people when they're going through it to have to divulge as much information. You're really not used to having somebody all in your expenses, all in your assets, and looking at your expenses with a fine-tooth comb. So it's definitely difficult, but the more upfront you are at the beginning, the better it is for you, because if you end up hiding assets or you get accused of hiding assets, then that's going to cost you a lot more to defend. So you definitely want to be upfront and honest about everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, last question for you today, Sarah. What advice would you give someone who's going through a divorce, or maybe who's recently divorced, and debt collectors are harassing either them or their partner or their former partner? What advice would you give them?
Absolutely. So, one of the things you want to look at, like I mentioned, are your assets. If you don't have very many assets to pay off those debts, then you may want to get in touch with an attorney, like a consumer protection attorney or a bankruptcy attorney, who can go over your options on how you can pay back that debt, maybe in payments. Or if you file for bankruptcy, then that would wipe out that debt. You want to be as much as possible on the same page as your former spouse, just so that you guys can come up with a game plan on how to pay that debt. Again, just because your name's not on it doesn't mean that you don't owe that money, especially in divorce court or in family court. Doesn't mean that the court may not, will say you don't have to pay that money back. So it is important for you guys to come up with a game plan together. And know it's easier said than done, especially in some of these really contested divorces where the parties don't speak to each other. But if you can get at least your attorneys on the same page and bring it to your attorney's attention that these debts need to be taken care of, then that's a lot easier. The other thing is, we have some creative ways of paying off debt in divorce as well. Oftentimes, there's got to be a sale of a house, or you have to pull out money for a 401k in order to give those funds or those assets to the other spouse. And when you're doing that, you may also be able to pull out a little bit more or pay off those debts with the sale of the home first before those assets get split. Or pull out a little bit extra from that 401k to pay off that debt so that you're not having to worry about the debt collectors and the harassment.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And yeah, to your point, even if you maybe don't get along with the person, it's worth it in the long run for you to just go ahead and partner with them, at least for that.
Absolutely. I mean, it just
Yeah,
makes it easier for you. And again, the aspect of debt is the worst case scenario is it gets on your credit report. Now you've got to deal with this credit reporting concern along with the divorce and everything else that comes with the stressors of going through that divorce. You kind of want to mitigate that as much as possible. Get your attorneys. That's why you have an attorney. Get your attorneys on board to have those tough discussions so that you don't necessarily have to have them with your spouse or your former spouse, but at least somebody is having that discussion.
yeah, yeah. Well, Sarah, it's been so helpful to have you on today and just to learn all about these questions that maybe you don't think about until you need to know them. So it's great to have this resource available for people. So again, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges, Insights from SoCal's Trusted Attorney with Sarah Costerbody. To connect with her, visit knhlawgroup.com. And be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. And with that, have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.